My name is James Hunt. In 2021, I worked as a night security guard at a large office complex in Texas. My shift started at 11 p.m. and ended at 7 a.m. The building had 12 floors, and after midnight it was completely empty. One night around 3 a.m., a motion alarm was triggered on the 11th floor. That was strange. Nobody was supposed to be there. I took the elevator up and checked the entire floor. Everything looked normal. No open doors, no broken windows. Then I heard footsteps. The sound was coming from the end of the hallway. I pointed my flashlight toward the darkness, but there was nobody there. A moment later, my radio crackled. "Security, do you have someone with you on floor 11? I frowned. "Negative, I'm alone." There was silence for several seconds. Then the dispatcher answered in a nervous voice. "James, we just saw a man standing directly behind you on the camera." My heart nearly stopped. I turned around immediately. Nothing. The hallway was empty. Then I noticed something in the glass wall beside me. A reflection. A tall man was standing only a few feet behind me. I spun around again. Nobody. Gone. At that exact moment, every light on the floor shut off. Darkness swallowed the hallway. And then right beside my ear, a whisper said, "Why are you in my building?" I ran toward the emergency stairwell, but when I reached the door, it wouldn't open. Someone or something was holding it shut from the other side. The stairwell door wouldn't open. I threw my shoulder against it again and again, but it felt like someone on the other side was holding it shut. My heart was pounding. Then I heard the footsteps again. This time they were getting closer. I slowly turned around. At the far end of the hallway stood a tall man dressed in black. He wasn't moving. He wasn't blinking. He was just standing there, staring at me. My hand shook as I grabbed my radio. "Control, do you still see that man on camera 11? There was a long pause. Then the dispatcher replied, "James, there's nobody there." I looked back at the figure. He was still standing in the hallway. I could see him clearly. But according to the cameras, he didn't exist. Suddenly the man took a step forward, then another, and another. I backed away until my shoulders hit the locked stairwell door. My flashlight flickered. The hallway went dark for a split second. When the light returned, the man was gone. I let out a breath of relief. Then I heard something behind me. Breathing. Slow. Cold. Right against my neck. I froze. Very slowly I turned around. The man was standing inches away from my face. His skin was pale. His eyes were completely black, and he was smiling, a horrible, unnatural smile. Then he whispered, "You should have left when you had the chance." At that exact moment, every fire alarm in the building exploded to life. Beep, beep, beep. Red emergency lights began flashing through the darkness, and for one terrifying second, I saw dozens of shadowy figures standing all along the hallway behind him, watching me, waiting. The fire alarms echoed through the entire building. Red emergency lights flashed across the walls. Behind the black-eyed man, dozens of shadowy figures began moving toward me. My legs felt frozen with fear. Then suddenly, the stairwell door swung open by itself. I didn't hesitate. I ran. Down the stairs. 11th floor, 10th floor, 9th floor, but something was wrong. Every landing I passed was marked, floor 11, again and again and again. No matter how far I ran, I never left the 11th floor. Then I heard heavy footsteps coming from above. Something was charging down the stairs after me. I looked up. The black-eyed man was standing at the top of the stairwell. This time he wasn't smiling. He looked angry, furious. I turned and sprinted downward as fast as I could. Suddenly my foot slipped. I crashed down several steps and hit my head. Everything went black. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying in the building lobby. Morning sunlight shone through the glass doors. The clock on the wall read 6:47 a.m. Police officers and firefighters surrounded me. Confused, I told them everything. The alarms, the shadows, the man on the 11th floor. But nobody believed me. According to the building's records, no fire alarm had gone off that night. Not once. A few days later, I quit my job. Months passed before I learned something terrifying. 15 years earlier, a security guard had died under mysterious circumstances on the 11th floor. His body had been found near the stairwell. His name was Michael Carter. When I saw his old employee photograph, my blood ran cold. It was the same man, the same pale face, the same black eyes, the same smile. Even now, years later, I sometimes receive phone calls from an unknown number in the middle of the night. Whenever I answer, I hear nothing but static, and then a whisper, a voice I will never forget. "James, come back to floor 11. My name is Ethan. In 2015, I worked as a night security guard at an abandoned hospital outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The hospital had been closed for nearly 10 years. Most of the equipment had been removed, but the building was still owned by a private company, so guards were hired to patrol it at night. For the first few weeks, nothing unusual happened. Then, one cold October night, everything changed. At around 1:20 a.m., I was making my usual patrol on the 3rd floor, when I heard footsteps echoing down a long hallway. I stopped walking. The footsteps stopped too. I shined my flashlight down the corridor. At the far end, standing beneath a flickering emergency light, was a little girl. She looked about 8 years old. She was wearing a white hospital gown. Her long black hair covered most of her face. "Hey," I shouted. "Are you okay?" She didn't answer. Slowly, she turned and walked around the corner. I ran after her, but when I reached the corner, nobody was there. The hallway ended in a locked storage room. There was nowhere she could have gone. As I stood there trying to understand what I'd seen, an old wheelchair beside the wall suddenly rolled forward on its own. I froze. The air felt ice cold. Without wasting another second, I hurried back to the security office and checked the camera footage. My heart nearly stopped. The video showed me standing alone in the hallway. There was no little girl, no figure, nothing, just me. I tried convincing myself that I was tired and imagining things. Then the office speaker crackled to life. A whisper came through the static. "Ethan, I'm still on the 3rd floor." At that exact moment, every light in the building went out, and the security office door slowly began to open by itself. The office door slowly creaked open. I stood frozen, staring into the darkness beyond the doorway. The entire hospital had lost power. The only light left was my flashlight. I aimed the beam toward the open door. Nobody was there, but on the dusty floor I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Small, wet footprints. The footprints looked like they belonged to a child, and they led away from the office. I grabbed my radio and called the other guard on duty. Nothing. Only static. Then suddenly one of the security monitors flickered back to life. Every screen was black, except one. Camera 3F12. The camera covering the 3rd floor hallway. My heart pounded as I looked closer. The little girl was standing there again. This time her face wasn't hidden by her hair. Her pale eyes stared directly into the camera. Then she slowly raised her arm and pointed behind the camera. The image suddenly glitched. Words appeared on the screen. Basement access. I had worked there for months and had never heard about a basement access room. The screen went black. For several seconds, the room was silent. Then I heard a faint giggle. Not from the monitor, not from the hallway, from somewhere inside the building. Against my better judgment, I picked up my flashlight and headed toward the basement stairs. The deeper I went, the colder the air became. The concrete walls were covered in old stains. At the bottom of the staircase, I found a heavy metal door slightly open. A rusty sign above it read, "Restricted Patient Wing." As I pushed the door open, my flashlight revealed dozens of abandoned hospital beds, lined up in the darkness. And in the center of the room stood a single wheelchair, slowly rocking back and forth, by itself. Then a child's voice whispered from directly behind me. "Ethan, you finally came." I spun around, but there was nobody there. Only darkness, and the sound of tiny footsteps running deeper into the basement. I spun around immediately. Nobody was there, but I could still hear the sound of tiny footsteps running deeper into the basement. Every instinct told me to leave. Instead, I followed the sound. The footsteps led me through a maze of dark hallways until I reached an old rusted door. Faded letters were barely visible on the sign. children's ward. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I pushed the door open. Inside were small hospital beds covered in dust. Broken toys lay scattered across the floor. The room looked as if it had been abandoned overnight. Then my light landed on a photograph hanging on the wall. My heart nearly stopped. It was the same little girl I had seen all night. Under the picture was a name, Emily Carter, 2011. A cold chill ran through my body. Suddenly a soft voice came from the corner of the room. "Did you come to take me home?" I turned slowly. Emily was standing there. For the first time I could clearly see her face. She didn't look evil. She looked sad, lonely. She raised her hand and pointed toward a dusty cabinet. Inside I found old patient records. One file belonged to Emily. According to the documents, she had died shortly before the hospital closed. During the chaos of the shutdown, some records were lost and never returned to the families. Emily's file was one of them. As I picked up the folder, the freezing air around me began to warm. The lights above flickered. Emily smiled, a peaceful smile. Then her figure slowly started fading into the darkness. Before she disappeared completely, she whispered one final word. "Thank you." And then she was gone. The basement became silent. For the first time that night, I felt no fear. A few weeks later, Emily's records were finally delivered to her surviving relatives. After that, no guard ever reported strange sightings in the hospital again. The building was demolished several months later. But even now, years later, I still remember that night. Sometimes I wonder whether Emily was really a ghost, or just a lost soul searching for a way home. My name is Albert Walker. In 2019, I worked as a night security guard at an abandoned warehouse in Ohio. The building had been closed for years, but the company still paid guards to watch over the property. My shift started at 8 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m. Most nights were boring. I sat alone in a small security office, watching dozens of security cameras while drinking coffee to stay awake. One night at exactly 2:15 a.m., something strange appeared on camera 7. The camera showed the third-floor hallway. A tall, dark figure slowly walked across the screen. I immediately assumed it was a trespasser. Grabbing my flashlight and radio, I headed upstairs. The third floor was completely silent. No footsteps, no voices, nothing. Then my radio crackled. "Albert, why are you on the third floor?" my partner asked. "I saw someone on camera 7, I replied. There was a long pause. Then he answered in a nervous voice. "That's impossible. Camera 7 has been broken for 3 months. The wiring was removed." I froze. My heart started pounding. Slowly I turned around. At the far end of the hallway stood a motionless figure. It looked human, but its face was hidden in complete darkness. I couldn't move. Then the figure took one slow step toward me. A loud burst of static exploded from the overhead speaker, and a distorted voice whispered, "Stay." I ran for the stairwell without looking back. The entire way down, I heard footsteps following me, but whenever I stopped, the footsteps stopped too. By sunrise, I had already decided to quit. A week later, I learned something terrifying. In 1998, a security guard had died mysteriously on that same third floor. His body was discovered in the exact spot where I had seen the figure standing. After that terrifying encounter, I was ready to quit. But the company asked me to finish my last 3 shifts. I needed the money, so I agreed. The next night felt different the moment I arrived. The warehouse seemed quieter than usual. At around 1 a.m., I was sitting in the security office, watching the monitors when every screen suddenly went black. For several seconds, there was nothing. Then the cameras came back online. My stomach dropped. Every monitor was showing the exact same image. The third-floor hallway. That wasn't possible. Each camera was supposed to show a different area of the building. Then I noticed something standing at the far end of the hallway. A dark figure. Slowly it began walking toward the camera. One step, then another, and another. The closer it came, the more distorted the image became. Suddenly, every monitor flashed white. At that exact moment, a loud crashing sound echoed from the third floor. My partner and I grabbed our flashlights and rushed upstairs. The hallway was empty, but on the dusty floor there were fresh footprints. Started near the far wall and continued toward the center of the hallway. Then they simply stopped, as if whoever made them had vanished into thin air. My partner suddenly grabbed my arm. "Albert, don't move." I looked at him. His face had turned completely pale. Slowly I turned around. Standing at the end of the hallway was the same figure. But this time its face wasn't hidden. I felt my blood run cold. The face was mine. The figure looked exactly like me. Same eyes, same hair, same uniform. For several seconds neither of us moved. Then every light in the building went out. Darkness swallowed the hallway. A moment later, I heard a whisper directly behind me. A voice that sounded exactly like my own. "Now it's your turn." The next thing I heard was my partner screaming. The sound of my partner's scream snapped me out of my shock. I ran toward him through the darkness. A few seconds later, the power suddenly came back on. The hallway was empty. The figure was gone, but so was my partner. I shouted his name again and again, but there was no answer. Fighting my fear, I searched the entire floor. 10 minutes later, I found him sitting near the stairwell. He was shaking uncontrollably. His face was completely pale. "What happened?" I asked. He stared at me for a long moment before speaking. "It was standing right behind you." A chill ran down my spine. "And then?" I asked. My partner swallowed hard. "It leaned close to your ear and whispered something." The strange thing was, I hadn't heard anything. The next morning, I quit the job for good. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I requested access to the warehouse's old incident records. While reading through the files, I discovered the report about the security guard who died there in 1998. When I saw his photograph, my blood turned cold. The man's face looked exactly like mine. Not similar, exactly the same. The only difference was his name. At the bottom of the report was a handwritten note. Before his death, the guard repeatedly claimed he was seeing another version of himself inside the building. I never returned to that warehouse. I tried to forget everything. For a while, it worked. Then the phone calls started. Late at night, an unknown number would appear on my screen. Whenever I answered, I heard nothing but slow breathing. A few seconds later, a familiar voice would whisper, "Albert, I'm still here." Then the line would go dead. The calls still happen sometimes, and every time they do, I remember the face standing at the end of that hallway. The face that looked exactly like me.